Welcome back. Another episode of the BBQ Pit Sports, our last NFL preview of the year. Thursday night, the NFL season starts. The Los Angeles Rams versus the Buffalo Bills. And then we're going to jump straight into things on Sunday with all the games. But we have the NFC West here. Is the last preview that we have. We're going to go over the additions, the losses, the people they drafted, and then finally we're going to get to what I think the record is that is going to complete the previews for the entire NFL. I'm not going to predict Super Bowls or anything like that. Maybe we'll do that like halfway through the season or something like that. But we're going to start with the Arizona Cardinals. They have they re-signed Colt McCoy. They re-signed James Conner, and they brought in Darrell Williams in the running back position. They acquired Marquise Brown in a draft day trade, and they also re-signed A.J. Green. They brought back Zach Ertz and Max Williams at the tight ends positions. They signed guard Will Hernandez in the offseason. Let's see, any other key ones here? Nothing big. They lose Christian Kirk to the Jaguars. That's okay. Marquise Brown fills that slot amazingly. They lose Max Garcia, who, surprisingly enough, Will Hernandez, not the greatest offensive lineman, I think is still an upgrade from Max Garcia. And they kind of just swapped. So Will Hernandez comes from the Giants. Max Garcia goes to the Giants. They lose Corey Peters and Jordan Phillips. Jordan Phillips going to the Bills. They lose Jordan Hicks and Chandler Jones. Jones to the Raiders. Hicks to the Vikings. Robert Alford and Malcolm Butler also leaving. So their defensive back room taking a little bit of a hit. But they did trade for Trayvon Mullen with the Raiders. Excuse me. So that solidifies them a little bit at the corner position after losing Alford and Butler. In the draft, they had the first pick of their draft was a second-round pick. They picked up Trey McBride, tight end, kind of add to their tight end depth a little bit. Cameron Thomas, who is an edge rusher in the third round. Along with Myjai Sanders, who's another edge rusher in the third round. In the sixth round, they got a running back in Keontae Ingram, probably maybe make the roster, maybe not. And then a offensive lineman in Lucius Smith. Seventh round, they picked up cornerback Christian Matthew, linebacker Jesse Lakuta, and then offensive lineman Marquise Hayes. I heard Hayes been playing pretty well in the preseason. I'm not sure. And this is another thing, too, that I didn't look at, and I was kind of mad that happened. You know, it happened like a week ago. So this would have been the only preview, or I think last week's preview that I did, or the week before, also was kind of dealing with this issue. But they made roster cuts. So, I mean, I talk about the draft, and I talk about, they drafted these people, So most of these guys are on the practice squad. You know what I'm saying? If I didn't go in there and search through which guys made the roster, which guys didn't, when I look at the offseason, I'm just looking at what they did and how good that is for their team. Now, whether they kept those players, they cut them, traded them, whatever they did with them, that's, before the season starts, that's irrelevant to me. I'm just talking about what the moves they made in the offseason leading into the season. So like I said, they added Trayvon Mullen. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be suspended for the first 6 games. And I'd say their weakest positional groups are linebacker and corner. They had Trayvon Mullen, so they got Trayvon Mullen and Byron Murphy. Other than that, they're kind of weak depth-wise at corner. And linebacker, of course, they lose Hicks. They lose Jones. They bring back some Dennis Gardeck and Nick Virgil. But, I mean, big loss at the linebacker position. So defensively, they get a little worse. Offensively, the additions of Marquise Brown, Darrell Williams to add to the running back room, Will Hernandez on the offensive line, and they drafted a few good offensive linemen. Trey McBride is going to add depth to their tight end position. So offensively, I think they got a little bit better. Defensively, I think they took a step back, even though they brought in Trayvon Mullen, which takes us to the Rams, LA Rams. They re-signed Matt Stafford. Re-signed Cooper Kupp, re-signed Allen Robinson. Or no, they didn't re-sign it. They signed Allen Robinson from Chicago. They re-signed Brian Allen and Joe Noteboom, 2 offensive linemen. They re-signed fucking all-pro defensive tackle Aaron Darnold. They brought in one of the best linebackers in the league, Bobby Wagner. And they also brought in, via trade, Troy Hill, who they let go to the Browns last season in free agency. 1 year later, they trade back for him. So that's good because they lost Darius Williams in the offseason to Jacksonville. It also said they lost Dante Deaton, but I've seen Dante Deaton playing with them for preseason. So, again, not sure what's going on there. They did lose Von Miller over the offseason. He went to the Bills, but like I said, they brought in Bobby Wagner, so they lose a little bit of edge rush. They bring in very good inside linebacker. They lose Sebastian Joseph Day. He goes to the Chargers. Andrew Whitworth retires, and Austin Corbett goes to the Panthers. Odell Beckham Jr. still yet to sign, and then they also lost Robert Woods to the Titans. Sony Michel also walked this offseason. He went to the Dolphins. He got cut from them. Now he's signing with the Chargers. So Sony Michel on the move. Their first pick of the draft was in the 3rd round. They brought in Logan Bruss, an offensive lineman. 4th round, they brought in Jacoby Durant, who's going to be good cornerback depth for them. 5th round, Karen Williams. Possibly a bottom of the depth chart type of guy, maybe even a practice squad player. 6th round, they got a safety in Quentin Lake and a cornerback in Darion Kendrick out of Georgia. And then in the 7th round, they got edge rusher Daniel Hardy, safety Russ Yeast, and offensive lineman A.J. Akuri. So like I said, they brought back Troy Hill, which is big for the cornerback room. And then with the additions of Bobby Wagner and Allen Robinson, makes the former Super Bowl champions even stronger. And in my opinion, favorites to go back to the Super Bowl this year. Because, I mean, the team got better, not worse. Matthew Stafford's getting older, but, you know, they got better. They got Allen Robinson. They got Bobby Wagner. They got fucking Troy Hill. You know, they're going to be a good team again this year. San Francisco, excuse me. San Francisco is a team that's hard to look at practically, whether they got better or they got worse. So they lose on their offensive lineman. They lose Laken Tomlinson. They lose Alex Mack, who retired. They also lose Tom Compton. They bring in no offensive lineman in free agency. They re-signed JaMychal Hasty, but on the final roster cuts, they cut him. They re-signed Jeff Wilson. They bring in Marcus Johnson and Ray McLeod and Malik Turner to their wide receiver room. They bring in a fucking variety of defensive linemen. Kerry Hyder, they re-sign. Camiro Toure, Maurice Hurst, Hassan Ridgeway. They bring in linebacker Oren Burks. They re-sign DeQuiz Denard. They re-signed Dante Johnson and Jason Burnett. And they also signed Tre'Davious Ward from the Chiefs. They bring in George Odom from at the safety position. They lose Raheem Mostert to the Dolphins. So they run it. And they also, another thing they did in the offseason is they cut, with their final roster cuts, they cut Tremon Sermon. So they cut Tremon Sermon. They lose Raheem Mostert. And they cut JaMychal Hasty. So, I mean, running back depth, I would think, I haven't looked at what the final roster, what the final depth chart is for San Francisco, but I would think that at running back they'd be kind of weak. They also lose Richie James, Mohamed Sanu, and Trent Sheffield. Defensive line, they lose Arden Key, DJ Jones, and Contavious Street. Cornerbacks, they brought back some guys. They bring in Tre'Davious Ward. I think that makes up for losing Josh Norman and Kewan Williams. And then finally, they lose Jaquiski Tart and Tavon Wilson. Jaquiski Tart goes to the Eagles and then gets cut in final roster cuts because they traded for CJ Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. So a little bit of lateral movement there at safeties. I think Jaquiski Tart, CJ Gardner-Johnson, they're kind of, one's young, one's a vet. They kind of give out the same production, though. In the draft, the 49ers bring in edge rusher Drake Jackson in the 2nd round. He played extremely well for them in the preseason. I think he made the roster. 3rd round, they brought in running back Ty Davis Price and wide receiver Danny Gray. 4th round, offensive line Spencer Buford. 5th round, cornerback Samuel Womack. 6th round, they brought in an offensive tackle, a defensive tackle, and a cornerback in Tyreek Castillo-Fields, who I think, out of the 6th round, would be the most productive for the 49ers. They got Brock Purdy in the 7th round, a quarterback to add to the depth chart, which I think they put him on the practice squad already. Trey Lance is going to start this year. Weird, because they signed Jimmy Garoppolo to a year deal. So, kind of what I'm thinking is they brought him just for injury, just in case Trey Lance get injured, because you're not bringing him there to get yourself trade value. Because if you were, then you're not planning to start Trey Lance. So they're kind of in a really weird position, in my opinion. But, to each their own. Trey Lance might be really good. You never know. Seattle Seahawks, last team in the division, tank mode. Straight up tank mode. They trade Russell Wilson in the offseason. They get back Drew Lock, Noah Fant. Is that it? Noah Fant, Trey Lance, some picks, some shit, or Drew Lock, sorry. Noah Fant, and some picks. They re-signed Geno Smith. I think he's going to be the starter. They re-signed Rashad Penny. They bring in Marquise Goodwin, re-signed DK Metcalf. They re-signed Austin Blythe and Kyle Fuller on the offensive line. They also got Shelby Harris in the Russell Wilson trade. Sorry about that. Cornerback, they bring in Artie Burns. Nothing serious there. They lose Bobby Wagner. They lose DJ Reed from their cornerback room. They lose Russell Wilson and bring in Drew Lock. They lose Alex Collins. Chris Carson retires. And all they do is draft Kenneth Walker in the fuck they draft Kenneth Walker? In the 2nd round. No, they got worse. They got fucking big time worse in the offseason. The draft was okay. Charles Cross, offensive tackle in the 1st round. 2nd round, they got Buffet Mife, an edge rusher, and then they got Kenneth Walker, the 3rd. Another offensive lineman, Abraham Lucas, in the 3rd round, which I think is really good value for him. I think he could have went as early as the high 2nd round, late 1st. Kobe Bryant, cornerback in the 4th round. Tariq Woolen, another cornerback in the 5th round. And then Bo Melton, a wide receiver in the 7th round. I think all 3 of those guys I just named right there are going to be really good depth players for the Seahawks this year. Being as though they're in a rebuild, they're probably going to play the young guys. It is what it is, man. I predict, before I even get into their records, I'm going to predict Seattle Seahawks being, top 5 worst teams in the league this year. So when we go strength of schedule, 1 is the easiest, 32 is the hardest. The 49ers come in at 13. The Seahawks come in at 22. Cardinals come in at 24. And the defending Super Bowl champs come in at 31. So the 2nd hardest schedule in the entire league goes to the Los Angeles Rams. I got them. I think it was kind of weird how I did it. I'm not sure if I did sweeps or what I did, but I got the Rams finishing 13-4. 49ers right behind them at 11-6. Cardinals at 8-9, and then the Seahawks winning 2 games. And I think I gave them 2 games. I think there's one of those games that potentially could go either way. So we'll see. 1 or 2 games Seahawks will win. Probably be top 3 in the draft next year. I think most improved will go to the Rams. First pick of the draft wasn't until the 3rd round. Biggest losses were Von Miller, Odell Beckham Jr. if he doesn't come back, Robert Woods, and then they brought in Bobby Wagner, Allen Robinson, Troy Hill to replace Darius Williams. So, I mean, they had, from what they lost to what they brought in, is fucking night and day. They brought in so much more help. They still have the potential to bring back OBJ. So, I mean, if they do that, I mean, solidifies that even more. But then when we go to the best draft, even though they're in a rebuild, I think the best draft goes to the Seahawks. They knew exactly what they needed to do in the draft. They knew exactly what the goal is leading into the season, that since they traded Russell Wilson, they're going into a rebuild. So they brought in depth at each position they needed to. They brought in good young pieces, and they're good building blocks. Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas at the offensive line positions are going to be great. And like I said, those 2 corners, Kobe Bryant, Tariq Woolen, they're going to be good one day. And then Bo Melton's going to be a really good physical over-the-top receiver. Maybe not this year. Maybe not next year. Maybe not in the next 3 years. Maybe it takes them 5-6 years. But they're going to get to that point. So drafting these players was good for them. I'm not saying it's going to work for them. I'm not saying it's going to make them win more games. I'm just saying for what these guys – because I don't think any of these teams were in the 1st round. second, third, second, and first. So one out of these four teams had a first-round pick, and it was the Seattle Seahawks. And Charles Cross, he's a really good offensive lineman, but I wouldn't say because they had a first-round pick is why they won the draft. I think it's because of the depth that they got and the amount of young pieces that they got in a rebuild. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the draft is only really, really beneficial for guys in rebuilds. When you think about first picks of the draft, the Detroit Lions, the Jacksonville Jaguars, Trayvon Walker, Aiden Hutchinson, guys like that, they're going to be good, but they're not going to be like, MVPs. They're not going to lead your team to the playoffs when they weren't a playoff team. So, I mean, you got a team like the Seahawks, who they weren't the worst last season, so they didn't come in with a high draft pick. They used their plethora of draft picks to kind of give them options for the future. And I think that's, out of all the teams in the NFC West, they did what they needed to do in the draft, which is why I gave it to them. Overall, I think the Rams win the division. Shit, I think they might win the Super Bowl again this year. But that's it, man. We'll see on Thursday. The Rams play the Bills on Thursday night, 2 nights from tonight, literally 46 hours from right now. That game will kick off, and the NFC season will be kicked off, and I will be fucking pumped, dude. I can't wait. I'm going to miss doing these previews, but we'll figure out some shit to do throughout the season. We'll do recaps. We'll do Super Bowl previews, playoff previews, all that shit. So stay tuned if you like the NFL content. Always come back if you like the UFC content, because we'll never stop doing that. It's my favorite sport. Until next time, stay barbecued. You guys know what the fuck it is, right?